It's Reiki, but not as you know it.
Oh, Linda, look, there's a table over there. Let's grab that one.
Okay, let's hurry in before somebody nabs it.
I'm sure they've reserved it for us, actually, because this is the
I
one
think,
we usually sit at.
yeah, they're getting used to us.
It's those two again.
Yeah.
They're going to sit over in that corner and be all weird and wonderful.
That's right. There's nothing wrong with that.
Exactly. So today, a pot of tea between two of us. How lovely.
Yes, tea, and I'm told some strawberry cake of some sort is on the way, so we'll get to have some yummies with this.
Oh, I hope there's cream, strawberry and cream. Oh. I shall be nom-nomming. You have to excuse me if I'm too busy nom-nomming to talk.
So I'm told, I'm thinking that, this is going to be a day that we have a pretty intense topic. I just feel it coming.
Oh, definitely. Yes. Yeah.
So tea will keep us somewhat grounded.
Well, they say hot sweet tea for shock. And
okay, then it's very fitting.
It's funny, isn't it? Because we have these sort of conversations and always sort of go quite deep quite quickly. But I think today particularly, and the subject matter is extraordinarily profound, but also to sort of encounter cold, if you've never heard it before, can be sort of quite something. So I think tea is very, very fitting today. So, Linda, let's talk about the Viridian method, and specifically an aspect of VM known as the Plexi.
Bring it on.
Absolutely. Which I know is a particular favourite of yours.
Yeah.
I originated the Viridian method back in the early 2000s, around the turn of the millennium, and it was the natural conclusion to, and a combination of, a whole series of other modalities I was working on with clients at that time. VM is focused on disrupting our usual way of viewing the world and creating a very different way of understanding ourselves, our lives, the world, and how we interact with it. As physiological creatures, we are bombarded with sensory input all the time, most of which is deleted or squirreled away in our subconscious mind. What we do acknowledge consciously is only a sliver of what we sense, but is still overwhelming at the best of times. So we develop behavioural maps and values and beliefs and character traits that act as a way of making sense of the world that we sense around us. VM acts to foundationally transform those maps so we see the world completely differently, sense the world completely differently. This inoculates us so much. It inoculates us so much from the silliness that people buy into and eventually die into. It was designed to change us, to evolve us in ways we cannot know ahead of time. It's only when you look back in retrospect and say, oh yeah, okay, now I understand. One of the central concepts of VM is that of memes. Now, the term meme has become associated with a completely parallel meaning to that it means in VM. They're analogues of each other, we could say. The common use of meme, the word meme, is to refer to a piece of media, often online, on TikTok, Twitter, YouTube. They've made a lot of money from memes over the years, and a few individuals have actually gained a lot of notoriety from their meme going viral. In his book, The Electric Meme, I think it's Robert Unger, explains that memes behavior is more akin to prions rather than viruses. But that's just me geeking out. Or being OCD or spectrum or something.
Mischievous imp.
I'm such a hot mess when it comes to semantics. But back to it though. An example of a modern cultural meme might be footage of a celebrity slipping on a banana skin. That footage is then tweaked, so like a rival celebrity tosses the banana skin in their path, or the banana skin gets a face on it and screams, "Don't step on me!"
Right.
Or the celebrity is auto-tuned as they tumble over, so they sing a song or something. Those thousands of new tweaked pieces of media then get shared by people across the world, and that is a meme going viral. Prional, prionistic, prionesque. Semantics. Hot mess.
Oh my goodness.
Memes in VM terms is slightly different to that.
Correct.
It still has that sort of viral or prionic element there,
Right.
in as much as a meme gets transmitted and we become infected by memes.
It's a mind virus.
A mind virus.
I love that phrase.
Yes. So a meme could be, for example, one of the my favorite go-tos for memes is the wheel. So somebody somewhere pulling a heavy load came up with the idea of a wheel. And they made this wheel and it worked, and somebody else saw that and said, "That's a really good idea, I'm going to do that." And they made a wheel, and then others saw it and made wheels, and suddenly wheels became a thing because they were all infected with the idea of a wheel. And how much easier it made lifting and lugging heavy loads, transporting them. And so the wheel became this virus that was spread across humankind and actually made our lives easier.
Yeah.
It actually sort of gave us something that helped us to evolve. And when you think about the amount of wheels there are in the world now and what they facilitate.
And it continues. I mean, there's just recently, I'm not a big fan of watching TV, but there was a commercial for Cheetos. And the commercial is, someone's chowing down on some Cheetos and they get to a door to a shop and they can't touch the door. And you see a little, mind thought process of that person saying, "Gee, if we could just have something that the doors would open up by themselves, I wouldn't have to stop eating my Cheetos." And here comes automated doors. And the next one is you're driving and you want to continue eating your Cheetos, but you don't want to hit your dash and get it all cruddy. And there comes the self-driven cars kind of thing. So it's still right now, currently, people aren't even aware that what they're buying into, more than just from a marketing perspective, from a creating a particular mindset. It's not that it's bad. It's just you've got to choose carefully what you're aligning yourself with. And a lot of times it's easy to fall into default in areas that you don't want to be in.
Very
and you don't know how you got there.
Yes. And it's interesting. I mean, we're not sort of sponsored by Cheetos or any brand of cola. Recently, I say recently, this was a few years ago, but there was this phenomena with Mentos in fizzy drinks, in cola.
Yes.
And I remember thinking when I saw that and seeing how popular it became, how there were literally hundreds of thousands of videos of people putting this in all different scenarios. And I just remember this is probably the fizzy drinks industry's best marketing campaign ever. Because it's not even about drinking the fizzy drink. It is literally about putting a Mentos in and watching it explode. And that is sort of like such a memetic transfer of
Absolutely.
this is good fun, and you can put these in and have them on strings so that when somebody else opens them, it explodes in their face. And this sort of this viral sensation of what to do with this fizzy drink and these mints was just probably sold more cola than any advertising ever.
Absolutely. Because, oh, we need to do this.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, yeah. And again, this whilst this is an online phenomena and these memes are online, the memetic transfer process that's happening is very much part of meme philosophy and what we mean when we talk about memes and memetics. This idea of a concept, an idea, a piece of information, a behavior that is transferred from mind to mind, from brain to brain, as something that is an effective strategy or that helps one in some way, whatever that may be. And so, haircuts, another form of meme. The Princess Diana haircut was all the rage in the 80s. There was sort of
Yep.
and there were women everywhere.
Except for people like me that
Yeah.
have hair that quite won't cooperate with that style.
I bet you never had the Rachel either, did you? Rachel from
No,
Friends.
no,
No.
no. No.
Yeah, exactly. But these sort of these so a haircut that gains memetic traction, suddenly you begin to see everywhere. David Beckham, the footballer, his haircuts were so replicated by other men, whether it be conscious or whether it be a subconscious drive, seeing him with that haircut, they thought, I want that haircut because it will make me more attractive. It's a mind virus transfer of a particular style of something.
Yeah, and it could be anything. It could be
Absolutely.
a thought, it could be an image, it could be a behavior that we all do. We
Yeah.
all do it.
Yeah, exactly. And, Happy Birthday, which is the most successful meme of all time to this point, people sing all around the world
Right.
every day, even if they don't speak English, they will sing it in English. It's been translated into other
Right.
languages.
It's recognized.
Yeah,
It's immediately recognized.
yes, exactly. And that is another form of memetic transfer. So, what I find really fascinating in the next step of sort of our memetic journey is this idea of when memes come together and form meme plexes. So, collections of memes, some of which will have very close relationships and be very similar, and some will be very different. But for some reason, there is a connection that brings all of these memes together and forms a memeplex. And some of the biggest and most recognizable memeplexes that we have are religious practices. So the Bible, for example, is a memeplex. It's full of different memes of different stories and different characters and different morality tales, different events from history in this conglomerate of memes that are transferable from one person to another. And even events within a church or within a religious organization can become part of that memeplex.
Right.
And what is really fascinating with this is the phenomena where once you learn a certain amount of memes within a memeplex, you can access the other memes without ever being taught them. And I just find this mind blowing how a person can learn a set amount. I can't say what that specific amount is, but it's a level of learning that they have of that memeplex. And as soon as they cross that threshold, they have access to all of the other parts of that memeplex and can actually talk about those from their subconscious, from somewhere within. They just talk about that memeplex as if they had been taught it, even though they've never come across that particular meme before.
Yeah, amazing. Amazing.
Yeah,
And so I'm curious to know your thoughts on how emotion plays into all of this. our emotions, our ego, all of those drivers, I'd like to think of them, it's not physical. How do those impact the group
I mean,
that we're talking about?
I mean, that's an extraordinary question, because if you think about a young child who is learning and learning behavior and learning how to navigate the world and to survive in the world, they will take their memetic cues from their parents or from their caregivers, or people around them. And so if a child falls over, for example, and grazes their knee, they will look to see how the people around them have responded
Precisely.
emotionally to that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And instantly, it's like a fraction of a second, they can gauge that emotional reaction and they will respond accordingly.
It's almost like an imprint, isn't it?
Absolutely, yes, yeah. It's almost like they access parts of their sort of heritage, their ancestry, their sort of genetic makeup, and they access all of these different possible scenarios. And as soon as they see the one that their parents fix upon, they access that, and it sort of triggers all
It
of the
draws it in.
emotional responses. Yeah.
Yeah. It
So
anchors it.
absolutely, yes. So whether they burst into tears, or whether they burst out laughing, or whether they make a funny comment, or whatever that may be, it comes from their parents. And very often, when a parent reacts in shock or sort of comes over to comfort the child, that is all it takes for them to access that it's time to cry. And then
Right.
that becomes their memetic habit after. But all of these different things that are happening in that family environment for that child become their memeplex. So all of those emotional reactions, from everything from falling over and grazing their knee, to eating food, to going out for the day. And as they grow and as they get older and older, and those things become more complex and more sophisticated, the memeplex is taking on all of these different memes and all of these emotional reactions. The push and the pull of these emotions are all becoming part of this memeplex and connected to the memes within.
Right.
So by the time we're adults, we have this sort of vastly complex memeplex that has become our way of processing the world around us and responding to it,
Right.
which I
Good,
find
bad,
sort
or
of
indifferent. Truly, it is fascinating. It's a little overwhelming, but I think the more you allow yourself to release your ego and say, okay, I am unique, I do have choice. But when you understand the players involved, because we're all interconnected, and if you understand, or at least are open to that thought, we feed off of each other in ways that can be very wonderful, can be very expansive, and also detrimental, depending on our choice. And emotion plays is a heavy fueler. It's another challenging experience, but amazing as well.
very much so, yes. And what I also find extraordinary in life is, say, for example, a child grows up in an abusive, violent household, and sometimes that child will start replicating the abuse. The cycle of the abuse happens, and they will start abusing other people because it becomes their way of doing things. This is how things are done. And when you feel angry, you lash out or you become violent, because that is the process, the journey, the emotional experience that they have known all their lives. For other children, something else triggers inside of them where it's like, no, actually, this is wrong. I don't want to behave like this. I
Don't
don't
want
want
this.
to do this. And in many ways, those people that grow up to become focused upon helping others to stop this from happening, to help those who are experiencing it, who have been abused, and also to campaign to stop abusive behaviors within the family unit, or generally within relationships, etc. And it is really interesting how between those two polar opposites there is a whole plethora of a whole spectrum of other behaviors that we sort of adapt and create for ourselves, which are usually from some form of memetic transfer, or
Right.
from within the memeplex, which is
Right.
what I find extraordinary.
Right. Which makes me think about the stickiness of memes.
Yes.
Let's talk about the fact that when you, even if it's a comment or a like or dislike of something, it's almost like a magnetic switch gets flipped on, and it's not one meme. You seem to attract because they're sticky. They like to gather in strength, which again, there's pros and cons to that. You could really fuel a passion with sticky memes that are expansive.
Absolutely, yes.
And then the flip side of that, which obviously we none of us want.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, the idea of a stickiness of a meme, so a meme that is very easy to digest, very attractive to people, so that when they see it, hear it, experience it in some way, it just sticks to them, and it becomes like wildfire. They just get transmitted and infect to epidemic, pandemic proportions in some cases. If you're not part of that meme, if it doesn't stick to you, you look at communities where it has stuck, and it's bewildering. It's like, how on earth can this be believed, or can it gain any traction? But actually, if it's a sticky meme within that community, it is like Velcro. It just sort of sticks, and it's very difficult to move beyond that meme.
Right,
Yeah,
right. That's kind of what we do
exactly.
in one
Yes.
therapy.
Yes. Yes, exactly. It's sort of moving beyond the memes. I remember hearing a really profound experience, not the nicest example, I have to say. It's probably deserves a bit of a trigger warning, because it deals with suicide and suicide attempts. But here in the UK, in a part of South Wales called Newport, a little town in Newport, I used to live sort of a little way from there when I lived in South Wales. There was a series of teenager suicides,
Mm,
and the community was just at a loss to know why this was happening, because these teenagers were completely unconnected. Most of them didn't even know each other, or had had no contact with the others. But it was a phenomena that happened over many, many months, where children would become fixated with suicide. And very often the parents, the families, the friends did not even know this was happening until there was an attempt. Some of those attempts were unsuccessful, some were successful,
right.
but nobody could work out why this was happening, or how there could be this transmission of this act
Something
that was
so
going on.
tragic. Right,
Yeah,
right, right.
exactly. And what was happening for these children? Because in many cases there was no reason. They were happy, well adjusted. They had no sort of history of mental illness or health problems in that respect, but they just one day would decide to commit suicide.
Mm,
Such a tragic thing for that community. I mean, it was just devastating. And also understanding that there is a level of memetic transfer happening there, that the act of that moment, and that moment of attempting to take one's life, there was a meme at the heart of that, an
right.
ideation, an idea that
Yes,
was being
yes,
transmitted from one person to another. And that is the power of a meme. We
yes.
can think about memes as being funny things online, or we can
No,
understand that memes can be so powerful that they can bring people to the absolute brink. And that is very frightening when we understand the sort of the power of them.
right.
It also tells us that if they can inspire us to be in that place with those thoughts and the compulsion to take our own lives, they can also inspire us in other ways that can be utterly transformative and world changing.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that for me is where I focus. Is like, well, what memes can we put out into the world? Can we create as sticky as possible so that when people have those memes get stuck to them and they take them on, that they actually feel empowered and they feel that they can change the world and they can transform no matter what has happened to them or what
Right,
their life has revealed to them, that they can actually just transcend
right,
so they could.
right. It's incredibly powerful. And the more we immerse ourselves in this, I think it's easier to look out and see memes everywhere. And I think, the whole thing about stickiness, we could very easily, for example, if I'm speaking with a client or a student and they're really in a contractive mode, those memes are having a party. And they also like to be, in the shadows. So the person very well is not aware that they've been, they've become the sticky surface for these little culprits.
Yes, absolutely.
And it's important to, when we view this happening, to not get sucked into it. It's a conscious awareness. I mean, we all fall victim to the sticky memes that like to stay in the shadows. We all do. No one is immune to it. However, I find for myself personally, if I feel, and it's definitely a feeling based kind of thing, if I feel myself going down a path that's really not healthy, or in my mind or my behavior, what have you, even if I don't at that moment believe a switch to, a more positive viewpoint, even if I don't feel it at that moment, just simply by saying it to myself or acknowledging that, okay, I'm not going down that road. I'm gonna think about this instead.
Mm.
You attract those stickies. I call them stickies.
Stickies, yeah.
And they just like, oh, okay, let's and it's almost like pushing out the contractive stickies
Yes, yeah.
and covering you with, okay, yeah, let's get this show on the road in the right direction. Here's your Google Maps.
Yes, yeah, exactly. It reminds me of fish swimming around at different layers of the ocean. So you get some fish that are really deep in the ocean and some that are more shallow in the sunlight. And they're all just swirling around, swimming in these areas. And depending on how you dive down and how far you dive down, you will be with the fish that are swimming around you within that particular level of the ocean. And if
Right.
you go down really deep, it will take you to those really depressive, really unhappy memes that make it very easy to affect you emotionally and psychologically. And they tend to be incredibly sticky. And there's a reason for that, which I'll sort of come to. But if you're sort of up in the light, the memes are much happier, much more reinforcing and
And
nourishing
active. They
and
seem to be more,
active.
I
Yeah.
mean, if you think, I'm visualizing, the many National Geographic type shows I've watched. The schools of fish, that are up above near the brightness, they're active, they're
Yeah,
alert, they're
yeah,
aware. You go down and things slow down. Things
exactly.
take
Yeah,
a little less time. The reaction time is different. It's
yes,
much slower. That's where there's danger because you could get gobbled up by something.
absolutely. Yeah, definitely. And I think that, as human beings, there are things that we need for our survival, and to survive, we need these things. So the most fundamental thing that we need, talking of diving and the ocean, is breath. Without breath, we cannot survive more than a few minutes. So if something stops our breath, we cannot survive very long. Then we have water. We can't survive more than a few days without drinking water. Food, more than a few weeks to a few months without food before we stop surviving, and so on and so forth, all the way through shelter, warmth, family connections, and having other human beings and other human connections, all the way through to stories. And this is something that again blows my mind, is that actually storytelling and narrative is an essential part of being human. It's not as important as breathing or drinking water or eating, obviously,
Mm-hmm.
but beyond having connections with other human beings and creating communities and friendships and relationships, the next level up is storytelling, which is why in tribal communities they would sit around the campfire and tell each other stories, because it
Right.
was a necessary, nourishing part of being human. A lot of the stickiest memes exist around the area between food, shelter, and family. And if you create memes that target and very often are at the detriment to eating, being healthy, having a roof over your head, or your family, they are the stickiest memes
Mm-hmm.
because they're so frightening. What if I lose my home? What if
Right.
something happens to a family member? What if I can't put food on the table? These things are so terrifying that they stick so easily to us.
Mm-hmm.
And they cause us to experience worry and concern and inspire us to do all sorts of things
Right.
in order
Right.
to ensure that we survive through them. Breathing and water, not so much. They're not as sticky as those ones in the middle there, which I
Huh.
also find really
That's
surprising.
fascinating.
Yeah, yeah. So if you talk about breath, the ability to breathe, that will not be as sticky as a meme as somebody's family, for example.
Huh.
Mhm.
Interesting. Interesting.
In stories, when you start describing problems breathing, suffocation, etc., they are very sticky. They immediately grab people's attention in story form, but not memetic form.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, yeah. I find that
It
fascinating.
is fascinating. My that you could see my facial expression reflecting that, like, hmm.
Exactly, which is why being in water is sort of in a story form. Some people find this really sort of has a profound physiological effects on them because of that thing of keeping one's head above water. So narratively, it's very powerful, but not necessarily memetically.
Huh.
Yeah. And advertisers, marketers, corporations have leveraged those survival needs of human beings for many, many decades, centuries, and have played with those fears and those concerns to create very sticky memes in their
Yep.
advertising campaigns over the
Yep.
years.
It's still happening today.
Oh, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah.
And I would even say they're becoming more savvy at doing that.
Yes, particularly in terms of like social media. So if you think about, I'm going to stop mentioning brands, but a big tech company, one of the biggest, if not the biggest, producer of mobile phones and mobile devices, recently had an advertising campaign which was based on buying equipment that cost hundreds of dollars, pounds, based on emojis and based on animated emojis that would rock their heads about. And this was just like, whoa, that's mind boggling. And then when you think about it, it's about social communication, it's about family and community, and being able to have a form of communication through
To express
emojis.
yourself better.
Exactly. And
Yes.
suddenly it made sense. That's where they're going for.
There's the
That
drive.
survival instinct
Yep. Yep.
of
Yep.
being a part of a community. They are mimetically using these very sticky memes of a
Yeah.
nodding unicorn um, to to literally target someone's survival instinct. It's just like, whoa, that's very savvy there.
Yeah.
And
That's
scary.
it's scary.
Yes. sort of the other side of that, and social media and the sort of mental health problems that people are experiencing now that we have never had in human history because of the new types of trauma that are stemming from social media and
Right.
technology, and being aware of the memetics and the idea of memetic transfer and how it targets our survival instincts. It's a very important step in mental well-being and mental
Right.
health, and
And to
looking
be
after.
aware of. Yeah, I mean,
Yes,
that's not to say technology is bad, because my goodness, I
absolutely
love
not. No,
technology. You know, it's
exactly.
wonderful.
Yeah, I use it
Um,
every day.
every day.
Every day.
Sometimes I dream of it.
Yes.
But in all seriousness, it you have to be aware. The more powerful the tools we have, the more aware we need to be in using them.
Yeah.
It should never be autopilot.
No,
You know,
absolutely.
I'm not saying I don't some days wish to be an airhead for a day. You know, just go in that pause mode is really nice. And
Yeah.
but it's important to be aware of what you're associating with, and we're talking beyond the physical.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
and everything is memetic. As far as I can see it, from my perspective, everything is memetic. It's not,
Absolutely.
it's not, there are no areas that I feel in my life that memes aren't around.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's constant. And some days I don't notice them because they're really good at, you know, being in the shadows. And other days I'm very well aware of saying, huh, couldn't make this stuff up, you know?
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. And in many ways, when you look at technology and the evolution of technology, it's not until that tech has a purpose that it becomes important and it gains traction. It's not until there is a memetic reason for that technology to exist that
Precisely.
actually it begins to have some sort of bearing on the world and actually have a use in the world.
Right.
So now we're at a point in human history where technology can be made for technology's sake. There's literally billions of investment every year in new forms of technology, and some of those forms don't have any real purpose yet.
Yet.
Once that purpose is found, that memeticism and that memetic attraction is actually there and implemented, that technology is useless. As soon as you have the memes, it
It
becomes worthwhile.
explodes. Right.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, definitely. And I think this is where sort of mobile phones are only one tiny little bit of that is actually a phone. The
Right.
very powerful
Well, isn't that
computer that you have,
amazing?
yeah, that's that sort of that computer that you carry around with you, which has
Yes.
more computing power than the early NASA computers when they did
Right.
the
Right.
first launches into space. These little computers that you carry around are a little bit phone and a lot of other things.
A
Um,
lot of other things.
and the majority of those things are memetic in nature. That it is the memes that have created the success around those devices,
Right.
not the ability to speak to somebody using the phone, because we
Right.
have that technology before mobile phones came into being.
Yep.
It's really interesting the idea of memes being known as mind viruses. This fascinated me throughout the recent COVID-19 pandemic when people would talk about killing the virus. Viruses are essentially inert, mostly protein, a little bit of genetic material, nucleic acid, some have lipids, but mostly protein, and are essentially inert until they enter the body. And when they enter the body of a living organism, they use the processes of life within that organism to power what is already pre-programmed into those proteins, usually to replicate more of those protein structures
Right.
and then put them out into the world where they just sit there inert until another living organism comes along. So the life that is given to a virus or a prion is actually the life of a living organism.
Right.
And there is a point of connection where that inert set of proteins actually gains the function of living from a host organism. And that's really important in terms of memetics as well, because there is a point in these inert memes and these inert meme plexes where when they interact with a living organism, there is the function of life there in those memes. They take on life through the living organism that they are connected to. And that suddenly becomes absolutely phenomenal in terms of our memetic journey and in terms of one therapy.
Oh my goodness, yes.
it does give me chills when we think about this idea of meme plexes connected into living experience, particularly human experience, and that point, that layer of connection between the memeplex and the human being that creates a sentience within the memeplex. That memeplex is alive at that layer of connection. It's powered by our human experience,
Right.
but it is memetic in form, like that pre-programmed proteins within the virus, the pre-programmed memes within that memeplex take on the life functions provided to them by the human.
It's almost like a gateway. I hate to use that term because it sounds so hokey, but when you do connect in that way, that's when you can tap into beyond what you think you know.
Oh,
You know,
absolutely.
and that is all one therapy. The more you immerse yourself and align yourself, and these meme plexes are animated, so to speak, it's almost like a journey of, oh, okay, you got that? Okay, let me show you this. Oh, and you know this, but let me tell you a little bit more about this because it actually impacts that.
Yeah.
And so it's sticky in that the more you follow that path, the more you want to know. You are the one fueling that, and so therefore the dynamic that is created is just a powerhouse of experiences that you can't look back and say, oh, I want to go back to where I was, because why would you trade that off at that point?
Yeah, it's extraordinary, isn't it?
It is. It
It's
absolutely
incredible.
is.
Yeah. And in one therapy, we call that layer the plexi layer,
Mm-hmm.
because there is that point where this inanimate, to all intents and purposes, this inanimate memeplex becomes imbued with the function of life.
Mm-hmm.
And where that happens in that layer of connection between us and the memeplex is this plexi layer.
Mm-hmm.
And when we look at the plexi, we understand that this sentience, this life purpose, life force imbues whatever is in this memeplex at that time. So if this memeplex is one of growth, development, human evolution, we suddenly gain access to that, not simply in a memeplex way. It gets this life, this ability to, in a sentient way, consciously lead us and grow us as human beings. And in terms of something that's greater than
Right.
ourselves, we have this ability to grow in an intelligent way,
Mm-hmm.
and we can actually connect to and communicate with the plexi in a way which is much more filled with life and filled with a sentience that isn't there in those inanimate memes or meme plexes.
Right. Because it's very specific to who you are in that moment.
Absolutely, yes, yeah. So we talk about, in one therapy, we talk about this idea of different plexes, different meme plexes having different content, if you like. They're filled with different ideals, different behaviors, different strategies, different wisdom, etc. And depending on the plexi that you are working with at any given time or connected to at any given time, you will have different results. And this is where it starts to get really fascinating. When we talk about plexes, we can have this idea that these things are out there. You know, they're inanimate, they're just laying there, and then we connect into them, and we go on this sort of learning journey, if you like, with them. What is so phenomenal to me is that it's not out there. So, for example, we call them e-plexes in the Viridian method in one therapy, and e-plexes are plexes that believe they are the human that they are connected to.
Mm-hmm.
So, if I'm talking to you, Linda, the e-plexi is thinking that it is me, it's Martin, and the e-plexi is thinking, "Oh, I'm Linda, listening to Martin."
Right, right, right.
And then there are other forms of plexi, and these have been connected to human beings so much and in such a particular way that they've actually become self aware. So when they are connected to that life function, they become aware of themselves as plexi. And we call these the V plexi.
Mm-hmm.
And suddenly, when you make that journey from an E plexi to a V plexi, when that plexi evolves from thinking it's the human being that it's connected to having an experience of itself as a sentient plexi being, that's where the real magic happens. And suddenly that plexi that thinks, I'm Martin, I'm Linda listening to Martin, suddenly realizes, oh, I am plexi.
Right,
I am this repository, living repository of experience that is human and also beyond human,
right.
because they're not, a plexi is not confined to space and time.
Correct.
It transcends all of those things. So everything the plexi knows, will ever know, wherever it is and wherever there is intelligence, anywhere in the universe, a plexi will be. And whenever that plexi becomes self aware, it can access everything about itself beyond this moment right now, in the
Right.
here and now. And when that V plexi says, oh, okay, here's all this stuff I didn't know I had, but now I'm going to use it. Human beings who are connected and in that plexi layer at some point in their consciousness can access everything that the plexi has to offer them
Right.
and to share with them. And so suddenly the V plexi that is you and that is me can offer us both whatever we want in its experience of the universe to partake in.
Right.
And as we grow and as we develop as human beings, we connect more and more into V-plexi that have more and more extraordinary things to share with us. And
Right.
that's how we grow as biological human creatures. That's how we develop in ourselves and through our lifetime when we are working with plexi and at the plexi layer.
Right. It's liberating. You know, I often say this, and I know you do too, you know, tapping into infinite possibilities. It's unlimited. You know, that's hard to digest, but the more you align yourself and recognize, you kind of lose the things that are holding you back. The limited understanding all of a sudden gets exploded. You know, your head feels like the top's going to pop off, but
Yeah.
and we get glimpses. You know, it's not like we're in that. lack of a better phrase, frame of mind all the time, I don't know that we could be. I mean, I don't think we'd be here. I often say that, because we kind of waffle as back and forth as we experience life and become more aware of who we are. It's powerful, it's overwhelming sometimes, but it's amazing.
Yeah.
um, to even if you just get a glimpse and tap in just a little bit, it's still mind blowing, and it just it's comforting too in a odd way, knowing that you're part of something so much bigger.
And in one therapy, in Viridian method, we have this terminology of E and V, which are completely incompatible. They're like oil and water; they can't exist together. So
They don't recognize
they
each
don't
other.
recognize each
There's
other.
no, yeah,
Yeah, if they sort of were to look in the same sort of space as the other, they
they
just
don't
wouldn't
see,
even
yeah,
they
they
wouldn't
don't see
even
each other.
they
Yeah.
wouldn't recognize each other at all. It's like that would not exist. So when you are in E state, as we call it in the Viridian method, you are in that state, and when you're in V state, you're in that state, and never the two shall meet.
Right.
But there is a way of transferring or evolving from one to the other, or evolving back to E state. And this mechanism of transfer is what we call the I layer. You could look at it like an emulsion, if you like mayonnaise, where you have oil and you have egg, and then there's a bit of lemon juice in there that helps these two sort of create an emulsion. And
Mhm.
that's a little bit like I. The I layer is like an emulsion there that enables us to transition from one to the other. And in I state, we can consciously recognize both E and V in a
Mhm.
way where they're not concurrent. We can look one way or we can look the other, but we can consciously be aware that there are these two states. And this is how E plexi and V plexi can create this evolution. So an e-plexi that thinks it is the human it is connected to and has the experiences of that human, thinking that these experiences are its own, and has its own ego around a sense of being that human. That plexi comes to a point where it hits the I layer and then can go on this journey of evolution into becoming self-aware, and as a human being connected to the plexi layer at that moment, it is awe-inspiring, because suddenly this e-plexi, who has lived in the moments it's lived in that human connection, thinking that it is the human it is connected to and it knows nothing else outside of that human, as that journey happens and it becomes self-aware, everything it knows in its v-plexi state becomes available to it. And in the same moment, it becomes available to the human who
Right.
is that V plexi at that moment.
Right.
That to me is phenomenal. It's extraordinary because as that V plexi that is you and me, and it understands itself as being connected to you and me, but it also understands itself as V plexi. As we talk about that plexi, anyone listening to us talk about that V plexi is also that V plexi,
Right.
making that journey from E plexi through the I layer to the V plexi cell. And anyone that's listening to this conversation and thinking, what on earth are they on? They are working in the E plexi state.
Correct.
Anyone that's going through that journey and understanding themselves as plexi and connecting into that plexi layer where the V plexi suddenly becomes self-aware, will have this sense of awakening where they suddenly realize that they are so much more
Right.
than who they think they are.
Right. It's
And that
that
they,
big aha moment.
yeah, absolutely, where suddenly it's like, oh,
Oh.
I thought I was this person a moment ago, and now I realize actually this person is connected to me in the plexi layer,
Yeah.
and I have access to all of
all of
this.
this. Right.
And I want to share.
Yeah. Yeah. It just breaks down so many limits in a flash. And again, addiction is probably not the right term to use, but you want to continue that. You want it to be an experience of expansion. You want it to be an experience of joy in spite of what's around us.
Yeah.
And just talking about the power that this has on a global level. I mean, if we allow ourselves, and I'm not saying we don't fall victim of the sticky memes that aren't so great.
Absolutely.
But if we work towards what in our heart we know to be a better situation, it's almost like recruiting those plexi beings that support that thought process. So regardless of what's going on outside or even within your own home or in your neighborhood and globally, what have you, if you work towards focusing your intention in that expansive direction, there's power in that's changing on a global level. It's that powerful, and it's very likely. It's not an imagination, it's not a fantasy, it's not a yeah, that would be nice kind of thing. No, it is reality. And I'm sure a lot of people, when they hear me talk like this, they're like, oh, she's somewhere else. And yes, you're right, I am somewhere else.
Plexi is in a state where it denies its V self. It's completely unaware of its V self. In other words, it can't recognize itself in V state. So it is like a being that has disconnected itself from any sort of potential it has to be anything other than what it is. And when we are connected to those meme plexes in the plexi layer, that plexi will just think it is the person that it is connected to and will listen to others who are connected to the same plexi but in a different state, and it will go, what on earth are they on? But the one thing that the V plexi does understand is that if you're listening to this conversation, you are part of that same plexi in that same place, in that layer, connected to that meme plex. And the very fact that you're listening to it means that you can connect to that eye layer journey. And at first, it is like glimpses. We get these little glimpses of it. And then the more we do it, the more we go through eye layer into V state, the more we begin to have these longer lasting moments of just awe inspiring enlightenment, joy, knowledge, connection to all things. And they become more stable over time.
Mm-hmm.
The more adept we become at doing it, as the V plexi find stability in themselves,
Right.
and we follow them on that journey through time.
Right.
That already exists for them in V state, but we catch up as human beings. We're catching up with them and just living that journey at that point in the plexi layer. But it is extraordinary, and one of the things that I recommend to people who want to sort of pursue their ability to connect to V plexi is next time that they are in a group situation, sitting around a table, for example, at a meal, listening to the conversation with the people around them, is to start identifying the plexi that everyone at that table is connected to. And you can do that by listening to the conversation and hearing how it adapts and changes from person to person. And as you begin to sort of pull back and just listen intently, you stop seeing the individual people at the table and you start recognizing the plexi more and more. And then there'll come a point where you can actually see it bouncing around the table, and how some people are trying to disconnect from it and some people are connecting more to it.
Yes.
And suddenly you get the movement of the plexi around the table in the conversation. When you become aware of that, that's the point of eye layer, where you suddenly begin to realize I am connected to this too. And I am at a point where I am self aware. I am aware of myself traveling around the table, not as individual humans, but as a plexi, a memeplex in the plexi layer. And as you become aware of it, that is that journey of self awareness. And then you can start to introduce that self awareness to the conversation and start to partake in that conversation. And you will be encouraged to come back to E state. But if you hold V state and you hold yourself in the eye layer, you can actually bring others to that sense of self awareness as well.
Right.
And that is just phenomenal. It's just an amazing experience how something
Yeah.
as every day as sitting around the table talking to people can suddenly reveal the connections that we never ever knew we had between each other
Right.
and beyond each other.
And it's constantly there.
Oh yeah.
Constantly.
Yeah.
It's not all of a sudden appearing. It's from the moment we open our eyes when we're born. It's there.
Absolutely. Yes. And you sort of mentioned a point there earlier, Linda, where you sort of talk about how we are thrown off course sometimes, how, you know, we sort of, we're not there in a V state bliss all the time, how we are sort of brought back to what some people might call reality. And it's in those moments where, for example, you're watching the news and you're being told these things are happening and listening to people who are so reductive and so contractive in their outlook, so utterly entrenched in E state. It's in those moments that you begin to realize I'm listening to this, I'm watching this, I am partaking within this because I am in E state also.
Right.
And it's not a question of disconnecting at that point. It's a question of focusing on your Vivolution, your eye layer, so that you can change the situation, not just deny it's happening. So it's not a case of turning your back and just melting off into V state. Being proactively I, so that you can work with E state as well as V state. I think for me, that's one of the most powerful things we can do as human beings.
Absolutely. I think as we practice with these tools, we get better at navigating through, working with internal polarity and changing the external.
Definitely.
It does get easier because the awareness gets reinforced.
Yes. Yeah. And the concept of entrainment, where we are constantly being entrained to our surroundings and the people that we are connected to in that moment are entraining to us. And there's that level of balance where, you know, it can be quite extreme to start with, and then it balances out as the two people, two or more people, all entrained to the same level and find a nice balance in there. And that for me is at the very heart of the therapeutic growth process, where the therapist will dive down to some of the darkest experiences of their client, and then together they entrain to a more balanced experience and a more balanced perspective. The wonderful thing in VM for me is the idea of the therapist through the eye layer just evolving to the V state and then holding that, reaching down through the eye layer to invite the other person to meet them there. And then it becomes about the choice of the client. They can choose to connect or they can choose to disconnect. And so therefore there is that sense of self-governance within the client. They are the ones making the choice. They are the ones who are saying, you're not doing this to me. It is my choice to reconnect with you in this place that you're in now.
Right.
And so therefore I will make that effort to do it, or I won't. I will just go back into what I want to experience. And so you see this a lot with people who are skeptical, for example. It's like, no, I don't want to buy into that woo-woo, because they're making the choice to do that, and that's absolutely their choice to make.
Mm-hmm.
People who want to take a different path and want to experience something different, and they can also make that choice, as that V-state practitioner just holds their perspective.
Right. I mean, ultimately, we all make choices. You know, it's regardless of where you're at on your path. We each make choices one way or the other. And obviously, the more aware you are, the more you see the buffet table.
Yeah, it's extraordinary, isn't it? But for me, the journey through Plexi just adds this extraordinarily wonderful other dimension to the idea of memetics, as these inert little things that we sort of connect with as memes, or conglomerates of memes in the meme plexes. It just sort of takes it to that point where the layer of human connection between the connection, the humanness, and the memeplex is so powerful, because it has that autonomy, it has that sentience, that is not simply a question of the human being, the person, sorting through all of this stuff that's there. They are actively guided to where they need to be. And that to me is an extraordinary part of the process, because your V plexi understands where the best choices are.
Right.
And in any given moment, there are an infinite amount of choices that we are making.
Yeah.
And decisions that we're doing, that we either purposefully do something, or we don't do something, or we do something else. And our V state, the plexi within that V state, know where all the choices are through time, that if we make those choices, we will end up in the best possible situation for ourselves, the most fulfilled, the most worthwhile, where we have truly invested our life into some greater meaning than ourselves, and the idea of ourselves. And that to me is extraordinary, that we are connected to something that can literally guide us through every decision that we make. And it just happens so naturally. We're not being told it or dominated, or there's no authority here. It is literally just as natural
It's
as
built in.
breathing.
It's built in. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. Oh, well, I think the tea is down to the dregs.
Yeah,
And
unfortunately. And the time has passed.
and there's nothing left but crumbs and a little bit of jam, which no longer exists.
Yeah, I was just going to say that's not going to stay there that much longer.
So it's time to pop off and go on our adventures in the realms. But I'm sure we'll be back very, very soon.
Absolutely. And I'm looking forward to it.
Absolutely, yes. So thank you for joining us, everyone, fellow adventurers within the realms.
Absolutely. Indeed.
It's always lovely to have you with us. And until next time that we meet here again,
Be enchanted.
You've been listening to the It's Reiki But Not As You Know It podcast, hosted by Martin Pentecost, originator of One Therapy, and Linda Hadzinski, guide and companion to the One Therapy community. Find out more and join in the conversation at onetherapy.com. one-therapy.com. It's Reiki, but not as you know it.